Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big welcome for Pastor Paul Walters.
It was 1992. I was 2.5 months into a 3.5-month road trip. I was in Terlingua, Texas, guest of Richard King. We were at the World Chili Championships in Terlingua, Texas. Richard was the cooker of Firehouse Chili. We were from Virginia, and he'd won enough competitions in Virginia to qualify for the World Championships. And it was always great being with Richard because Richard didn't just bring his Firehouse Chili, he brought his fire extinguisher, which was one of those plastic jugs that you used to spray like weed spray and insecticide and stuff, except he would fill it with margaritas. And if you stopped at his booth long enough, he would fill your mouth with margarita. It was great. Now, Terlingua is in the middle of nowhere. In fact, tonight I heard it described as you go to the end of the world and then you turn right and you go another 100 miles and you might be near Terlingua. It's near Big Bend National Park, right on the Rio Grande River, way down in South Texas. And it is barren desert. And while we were there, this guy had a single-engine plane, and he was taking people up for rides. And Richard offered to pay for a ride, and I figured, Richard pays for a ride, I'll go for a ride in a plane, right? So we get in that plane, and as soon as the plane takes off, the desert is transformed. Because what you see on the ground is just dry dirt and dust and rock. But as soon as you get up in the air, as soon as the plane takes off and you look out at that ground, you see that everything that's dry and barren has been crafted and shaped by water. You can see where dry riverbeds are and stream beds, and you almost see ripples in the sand in places where people haven't walked. And I could see that the whole area was shaped by these unseen, invisible forces that came and went periodically and crafted the whole thing. And I saw in that my life shaped and molded by these unseen forces that would come and go at times and sometimes be visible and sometimes just kind of sink into the background, but still shaping and guiding my life. 4 months earlier, I was 22 years old. I was living rent-free in my parents' basement. I graduated from college. I had a bachelor's in English with no teaching certificate. And I had taken my summer job, silk screening t-shirts, and transformed it into a management position. And that afforded me the luxury of a black Nissan 240SX, 5-speed. It was fancy. But I realized at some point in the process that a life goal of living in your parents' basement, driving a cheesy sports car, probably was not the highest of ambitions. And there had to be something else, right? And now my mother is now a retired teacher. My father was a researcher for the federal government. And I see in them kind of this desire to do something with their lives that has nothing to do necessarily with money. It's not that they weren't financially successful, but that was never like their focus. They were always interested in doing something for people, at making a difference in the world and being present. And so I saw that in them. So I got a map out. I took a map of the country and I put marks every place I could stay for free. From Virginia where I lived all the way to Alaska. And I sold my black Nissan and I bought a red GMC S15 pickup truck, had these big ugly stickers on the side. And I headed off on my trip. I printed one more t-shirt, had a picture of me in front of my truck. And on the front it said Clifton to Key West via Fairbanks, Terlingua, and Points West. I called it the Points West Tour, so on the back it was like a concert t-shirt, it said Points West Tour. I had a couple dozen of them. I gave them to everybody I stayed with, like as compensation for it all. It was great. So my friend Jason was going to school in Boulder, and he needed a ride, and it was August, so we joined together and drove out to Boulder from Virginia. We stopped in Memphis, and we thought we'd go to Graceland until we saw the prices. And then we just kind of waved at the Jungle Room, and we headed off down the road because we were just too cheap to do that. I got to Boulder, dropped Jason off, and then I was on my own, 22,000-mile journey. I ended up going up to Montana first. A couple of years earlier, my father and I had been backpacking in the Bob Marshall Wilderness area. And while we were in the wilderness, we were hiking, and one day this guy rides up on a horse with another pack horse behind him, and he says, "Hi, I'm Adam Hubble, Wilderness Ranger." And we thought that was like the coolest job in the world, Wilderness Ranger. And he's just riding around a horse in the middle of nowhere. And Adam tells us that on our last day, as we cross the last pass before we leave the wilderness, that if we climb and scramble up to this peak, that we'll be able to look and we will see every place we had hiked the entire week. And the next couple days, this is just in the back of my head the whole time, because I think this is so cool. And we're grinding up that last pass, and I was really fit and strong at that point. I'd been running cross country in college, and so walking was nothing. And I usually didn't do this, but I left my dad way behind. And I got to the top of that pass, and I took my pack off, and by the time he got there, my heart rate was back to normal. My clothes weren't sweaty anymore, and he's dripping sweat and exhausted. And I said, let's go to that peak. And he's like, no, we can't. I'm like, no, we gotta go see that peak. And he says, we gotta meet Uncle Ray. Now, my Uncle Ray is the kind of guy that on his coffee table in his living room, he has a bowl of green jelly beans for the children, which are jalapeno flavored. He thinks this is funny. Uncle Ray also has a dog named Mitzi, who he invariably brings anytime he is going to do something nice, like pick you up in the wilderness and take you to civilization. Mitzi's one of those little wiener dogs, and Mitzi, on the entire drive, I know from past experience, is going to do one of three things the entire time. This dog will either bark, lick any exposed piece of skin, or if you try and pet it to get it to stop doing one of those other two things, it will bite you. This is the Uncle Ray that we don't want to go up to the peak to meet. But my dad rules the day. I throw my pack on and grumble on down the hill. But on my trip, I climbed that peak. And I walked all the way up to the top, and I had my camera. I was taking pictures in every direction, and where we had hiked had mostly been east of where that peak was. And so I look off to the east, and looking off to the east, I'm not just looking back across those places my father and I had hiked, but I kind of see back all the way to the East Coast. I see all the way back to Virginia, back to my home. And standing on mountains always gives me a feeling of like standing on the foundations of the world. You're on like this hard, solid rock that's basis of everything. And for that, as I look across and I think back to the foundations of my life and the grounding that I had, I saw myself in that moment as a 10-year-old boy sitting in the front pew in the left-hand side at Christ Lutheran Church in Fairfax, Virginia. And I saw my parents there, and every Sunday when we'd have communion, I would sing this kind of visceral line in the communion song that we would sing. It would say, "Eat his body, drink his blood." And in my little pitchy 10-year-old voice, I would sing that louder than anyone else in the congregation. And my parents every week would look for a way to crawl under the pew. It was their fault. They chose the front row every Sunday. But I saw back to that foundation they gave me, generation upon generation of my family that found that grounding in faith and that basis. And I saw that in my past and in my future. I headed on down the mountain and up on the road. I headed north heading to Fairbanks, which is a long stinking way from Montana. The Alaska Highway is a big, long road, but it's 1,000 miles on 2-lane roads to get from Montana to the start of the Alaska Highway. And to get from the start of the Alaska Highway to Fairbanks is another 1,500 miles. It's like driving all the way across the continent on 2-lane roads. And it's empty. It's empty. It makes the UP of Michigan look like Detroit when a Tigers game let out. There's nobody. And in fact, it's the kind of place where when you see a gas station, if your gas tank is at half, you stop and you fill up because you just don't know. You don't know when that next gas station is going to be, and you got to take advantage of it when it gets there. And in a way, it makes me think of those kind of moments of joy in life, you know, where the ordinariness of the day, the kind of tediousness of things, and then this kind of some little gift breaks in. Like when you're listening in the radio and you hear a song come on, and it's one of your favorites. It's the song you love, and I'd hear that in that truck, and I had this thing with these like 5 tapes that I would be able to store, and even if the song was on one of those tapes just above my head, hearing it on the radio, there was something like special about it in that moment, that little kind of gift of grace, this idea that somebody else actually liked that same song. these little moments that break into our lives. That was early September. By October, I'd worked my way through Alaska and on back down to Seattle. My mother's family was from Seattle. My parents actually were out there. My dad was winning some award at his college. My sister was out there. I had all these kind of friends and family. It was this intense week with people I knew who loved me and cared for me. And it was a gift, but it also made that kind of next stretch of the trip almost harder. And I found that in that moment that loneliness isn't something that kind of necessarily builds over time. It's almost like sometimes you can just flip a switch and it just is there. You don't know where it came from or how to get rid of it, but all of a sudden it's just this thing with you, on you. And as I left this kind of week of being around these people and headed south down through Oregon and into Northern California, I had this kind of weight even as I traveled. I remember at this diner in Northern California, waitress in one of those kind of faded pink waitress clothes, and she gives me my lunch, my chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes and canned green beans, good diner food, right? And it was amazing and delicious and as good as any diner food ever is. And then she hands me my check at the end, and she has one of those kind of throwaway lines that waitresses give you at every restaurant that's ever been. She says, "See you again soon." And I thought, I'm never going to see you again for the rest of my life. And it was this like weight too, because I'm thinking, I don't even know who you are. And I'm all alone. I headed south, and I wanted to go to San Francisco. And I'm camped at this campground a couple hours outside of San Francisco, and I'm longing for like someone to talk to, because at this stretch of the trip, I realized that there isn't a single person who's talking to me that isn't paid to talk to me. You know, you travel and like, it's the person at the gas station, the waiter or the waitress, they don't want to talk to you. They have to. It's their job, And so I'm filling up water bottles, and this guy is there, and we're talking, and he's interesting because I'm this 22-year-old on this crazy trip all over the place, and I'm telling him I'm going to San Francisco, and he like has this fear. The look on his face you get when you tell people you're from Detroit, you know that look? Except he's even kind of worse, and he starts like, he looks at me, and he didn't say it, but I'm pretty sure he thought that if I went to San Francisco, I would be dismembered and parts of my body scattered all around the Bay Area, and no one would ever hear from me ever again. And he looks at me and he says, there's gangs there in San Francisco. It's dangerous. And he starts naming them. He talks about the Asian gangs and the Latino gangs and the African-American gangs, except somehow he manages to find a more vile and obnoxious and offensive word to describe every category of people he creates in his mind as he goes. And all I think is, I want nothing to do with you at all. And lonely is a much better friend than you. I drove in. I had a great day in San Francisco. I don't know what he was talking about. I crossed the Golden Gate Bridge. I went to Lombard Street, that tall, windy street. I went to Haight-Ashbury and had the best vegetarian black bean burrito I've ever eaten in my life. It was a great trip. By late November, I'm all the way east. I've gotten to Gainesville, Florida, where there was this author whose book I had to get him to sign. And I stalked him and got him to do that. And then I had another decision, because the back of my T-shirt said the last stop was Key West. And I had road trip with a couple of friends of mine before from Virginia to Miami. And I knew that when you crossed the Florida line and got into Florida, that Miami was still a long, long way away. And I didn't know anyone in Key West. And I thought, drive all the way down Florida, and then drive all the way to Key West, and then turn around and drive all the way back. I wasn't up for it. And I thought, if I head north now, I can make it home for Thanksgiving. Won't that make my mom happy? So I headed north. My last stop, the last night I spent on the road, was in Salem, Virginia. And I called up this guy, Dwayne Westerman. Dwayne is a pastor, a Lutheran pastor, and I'd known him from my days as a youth and participating in different things. And to this day, it kind of like, in fact, as the older I get, the more I realize how amazing it was that I called this guy up randomly. I hadn't talked to him in a couple of years. And I call him up, And I ask him if I can crash at his house for the night. And this guy, this 50-year-old guy with a family says, sure, come on in. And I'm thinking, that's crazy. But he welcomes me in. I had an extra t-shirt to give him, so it worked out. But I'm talking to him, and at this point, this is the grand 22,000-mile trip that's supposed to, plan my future, and I have nothing. He's like, so what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'll get an MBA. And he's he's a teddy bear inside, but not on the outside. And he didn't think that was a good plan at all. And he was pretty clear about how he didn't think that was a good plan at all. And he says, well, what do you want to do with your life? I said, I don't know. I said, I want to make a difference. I want to help people. And we kind of left it at that. The next morning, I'm driving north on Interstate 81. I'm at the Hollins exit. And I have this kind of moment of clarity, this moment of transcendence where I know for certain where I need to be going. And it's not necessarily what I want to do, but what I understand this God of the universe is calling me to do and leading me to do, this path, this road that's being laid out for me. And I know in that moment with absolute certainty that seminary and the education leading to become a pastor in the church of my youth is my future. And although I've got a little bit of Jonah in me, the prophet Jonah, who tries to avoid, doing the things that he's supposed to do. So I didn't enter right away. I waited another 9 months, and I made sure my avoidance levels were high enough. I made sure I never set foot on campus until the day I moved in. Because, you don't take a 22,000-mile trip to get back to the beginning to realize where you need to be and avoid all that without actually, continuing that process. But I look back on that journey and how it touched me and changed me and impacted me. And I am so grateful for the people I encountered. I'm so grateful for the strangers who welcomed me, the friends and family who gave me places to stay, who fed me, who put me up. And for people like Dwayne who kicked me in the butt when I needed it and who shaped my life in ways that they won't even know. It was those invisible forces kind of moving and crafting and getting me to where I needed to be and doing what I needed to be doing. And at this moment in my life, as I stand here this night, I am absolutely certain that while I don't know where the end of the road lies or where the paths go into the future, I am absolutely convinced I am where I need to be, doing what I need to be doing. Thank you.
Pastor Paul Walters. Sometimes you have to go far, far, far away to find out who you really are.